A massive scandal is developing at the New York Times, where it has now been revealed that the co-author of a discredited article on rape on October 7th, liked genocidal posts on social media, is a former member of an IDF intelligence unit, and had not even worked as a journalist at all prior to taking on a central role in Times coverage. The Times is now investigating the journalist, a woman by the name of Anat Shwartz, but the questions about this incident go so far beyond this one journalist and her appreciation for psychopathic social media posts. So here is the backstory. On December 28th, the New York Times published and news alerted what appeared to be an extensive investigation into one of the most fraught and contested parts of the Israeli October 7th narrative, that sexual assault was used by Hamas systematically as a weapon of war on that day. The piece was headlined, "Screams Without Words, How Hamas Weaponized Sexual Violence on October 7th, and the byline named three different authors, Jeffrey Gettleman, Anat Shwartz, and Adam Sella. Now, the fact that Hamas committed atrocities on October 7th is not in dispute. However, certain particularly horrifying anecdotes claimed by the Israeli government have fallen apart under scrutiny by Israeli outlet Haaretz. These debunked claims include that 40 babies were beheaded, that a baby was found in an oven, and that a pregnant woman had her baby cut out of her, among others. It is no accident, of course, that these stories were propagated. This agitprop about the barbarism of Hamas was crucial for Israel in their attempt to justify a barbaric assault on the Gaza Strip. So this piece, Screams Without Words, was published by the New York Times purporting to back up Israeli assertions about widespread rape on October 7th. It was incredibly significant. But no sooner had the piece been published that major problems emerged. The family of a woman murdered by Hamas, who was presented as a central figure in the New York Times narrative about widespread rape, denounced the story in furious and unequivocal terms. They claimed that when the Times interviewed them about their murdered loved one, Gal Abdush, under false pretenses, the family said that they had no indication Gal had been raped, no evidence to support such claims, did not believe them to be true, and that they had no idea that the Times had planned to say that Gal had been raped. Multiple family members told the Israeli press that the media invented the story and demanded that they stop spreading lies. Gal's story comprised no less than 1/3 of the lengthy Times report. And that was really just the beginning of the problems with that report. Key witnesses were caught telling inconsistent stories to different news outlets. Screams Without Words had relied on the testimony of a volunteer with an ultra-Orthodox nonprofit called Zaka that had been caught fabricating some of the most visceral debunked anecdotes about October 7th, including that one about the 40 beheaded babies. And the Times itself, well, they appeared to lose confidence in the reporting. As our colleague Ryan Grimm, along with Daniel Boguslaw, reported for The Intercept, an episode of the New York Times flagship podcast, The Daily, had been planned to detail the reporting from the sexual assault piece, which had originally been much hyped by the New York Times newsroom. But as the quote-unquote reporting in the piece fell apart, the Times was left with a major dilemma about what to do. Should they ignore the problems, stand by their shoddy reporting, and push out the Daily episode as recorded? Should they edit the Daily episode and attempt to correct the record, add caveats, and effectively admit the problems with that original report? Or should they take the coward's way out and just shelve the episode entirely? Now, a responsible outlet would either correct the original story or retract it, given the serious journalistic failings that have been brought to light. But the Times chose to keep their propaganda piece as is, shelve the Daily episode, and hope that everyone just moved on. Incredibly, the lead author of that piece, Jeffrey Gettleman, was at great pains to explain that as a journalist, he did not see his job as providing evidence for his reporting claims. Take a listen.
I don't want to even use the word evidence, because evidence is almost like a legal term that suggests you're trying to prove an allegation or prove a case in court. That's not my role. We all have our roles, and my role is to document, is to present information, is to give people a voice.
So if this investigation didn't include evidence, what the hell are we doing here? But as if all of that wasn't wild enough, we are now learning some absolutely shocking things about the background of the second reporter on that piece, the aforementioned Anat Shwartz. Shout out to Z Squirrel for doing this digging online. First of all, on October 7th, Anat liked to post calling for Gaza to be turned into a slaughterhouse. This post was so overtly genocidal in its rhetoric that it was actually cited in South Africa's filing at The Hague. The post read, in part, one principle that needs to be abandoned today, proportionality. Need a disproportionate response. May Israel see what she is hiding in the basement. If all the captives are not returned immediately, turn the strip into a slaughterhouse. If a hair falls from their head, execute security prisoners, violate any norm on the way to victory. The Post goes on to explain, quote, those in front of us are human animals. Anat also apparently liked a post about that 40 beheaded babies lie, and another one calling for an effective propaganda operation to equate Hamas with ISIS. Love for our journalists to be out here explicitly advocating for propaganda campaigns. This is completely insane. If a journalist had liked similarly genocidal posts calling for Israel to be turned into a slaughterhouse, it would be a national scandal. The entire New York Times leadership would be dragged in front of congressional hearings and summarily fired. In fact, New York Times forced out a prominent staff writer who was not involved in Israel-Palestine coverage simply for signing a letter opposing Israel's genocide in Gaza. The International Court of Justice, of course, has now agreed that it is in fact plausible Israel is committing genocide. Now, after Anat's posts were exposed, she locked down her Twitter account, deleted most of her history before returning. But while she can delete her social media history, she can't really so easily delete her professional past, which, if anything, is actually even wilder. So apparently, prior to landing this plum gig at the New York Times, Anat Shwartz had never worked as a journalist, never published a single piece anywhere, ever, before being scooped up by the Times in November, just after the October 7th attack. She had been working as a small-time filmmaker. Perhaps the Times was looking for someone with a flair for the cinematic. But really think about this. Actual journalists spend their entire careers dreaming of a New York Times byline. The Times, after all, is the holy grail of elite journalism. And this lady, with literally zero experience, somehow gets brought in on a highly sensitive investigation on one of the most fraught topics imaginable. How the hell did this happen? But Anat is not only a former filmmaker, she is also a former IDF soldier who served, I kid you not, in an Air Force intelligence unit. So the lady with the genocidal social media posts, with no prior journalism experience and a background in Israeli military intelligence, was contracted to report on a piece which perfectly served Israeli government propaganda efforts at the time. What is happening here? Ryan, of course, has been doing great reporting as usual. He's got it from several sources. The Times is parting ways with Anat. It's already been reported she is under investigation. But at this point, those actions seem like convenient scapegoating to cover up much graver questions. Who brought this lady in? How did they find her? Who greenlit this piece? Why have they not addressed the journalistic collapse of their supposedly blockbuster investigation? And what other Israeli propaganda and lies are they currently laundering? It's not only the New York Times, by the way. Wall Street Journal recently published a piece based on zero evidence that ran cover for Israeli claims about UNRWA, which helped justify the U.S. pulling aid at a time when Palestinians in Gaza are starving to death. That piece, too, was co-authored by a so-called journalist named Carrie Keller-Lynn with undeniable biases. She, too, served in the IDF and in an interview bragged about how her very close friend literally created social media for the IDF. Those are her words, not mine. Once these photos that you can see on your screen started circulating, Carrie Keller-Lynn also locked her accounts, scrubbed her history to prevent anyone from gathering further insights into her pro-Israel bias. Now, this incident casts in a whole new light the studies would show systematic bias across major news outlets when it comes to coverage of Israelis and coverage of Palestinians. Israelis are slaughtered, Palestinians just mysteriously die. Great pains are often taken to make sure that Israel is never directly ascribed blame. And as the Palestinian death toll has climbed, the coverage of their deaths has